In this provider training video, we will demonstrate how to conduct the Patient Health Questionnaire, also known as the Patient Resident Mood Interview, Item D0150 PHQ-2-9, and D0160 Total Severity Score. We will begin by reviewing the PHQ-2-9 item guidance and coding instructions. The PHQ-2-9 is a validated interview that screens for symptoms of depression. It provides a standardized severity score and a rating for evidence of a depressive disorder. The item D0150 is composed of two initial screening questions that must be asked in sequence to assess symptom presence and frequency. The need for further evaluation of a patient's or resident's mood is determined based on their responses to D0150A and D0150B. For each of the symptoms listed on the PHQ-2-9, the interviewer must ask the patient or resident, "Over the last 2 weeks, have you been bothered by any of the following problems?" This question is meant to determine symptom presence. The response would be captured in column 1. If symptom presence is identified, indicated by code 1, yes, in column 1, the clinician would ask the patient resident, "About how often have you been bothered by this over the past 2 weeks?" to determine symptom frequency. This response is captured in column 2. A cue card with the response choices clearly written in large print might help the patient resident comprehend the options for symptom frequency. If you are interested in accessing these cue cards, pause the video now and scan the QR code for your setting. The cue cards can also be found on your PAC settings QRP training page. Let's look at some coding examples. For the first question, symptom presence, if the patient or resident responds no, then code a 0 no in column 1 and enter a 0 never or 1 day in column 2 for symptom frequency. If the patient or resident responds yes for symptom presence, then code a 1 yes in column 1. The interviewer will ask a follow-up question to determine symptom frequency. The interviewer must ask the question, "About how often have you been bothered by this over the last 2 weeks?" Depending on the patient's or resident's response, code a 0, 1, 2, or 3 in column 2 for symptom frequency. Finally, if the patient or resident does not respond to the first 2 questions regarding symptom presence, meaning that the patient or resident is unable to respond, chooses not to complete the assessment, or responds nonsensically, code D0150A1 and D0150B1 with a 9, indicating no response in column 1. Then, leave the boxes regarding symptom frequency, column 2, blank. If symptom presence is not assessed, enter a dash in column 1 and leave column 2 blank. Once coding for the first 2 questions is completed, the interviewer determines if the assessment should continue. The determination of whether to ask the remaining 7 questions, D0150C to D0150I of the PHQ-2-9, depends on the patient resident's responses to questions about the first 2 symptoms. If both D0150A1 and D0150B1, symptom presence, are coded with a 9, or both D0150A2 and D0150B2, symptom frequency, are coded with a 0 or 1, end the PHQ interview. Otherwise, continue to ask the remaining 7 questions. Alternatively, notice that in this example, one of the symptoms was coded with a 3. This would indicate that the interview should continue, addressing the remaining 7 questions. Now that we have reviewed the item guidance, let's watch a PHQ-2-9 interview, code the PHQ-2, and determine if the interview should continue. We invite you to pause the video and obtain a copy of the patient-resident mood interview to code the scenarios. Mr. Mason was just discharged from the hospital after having surgery 3 days ago. The nurse is conducting a patient-resident mood interview.
Okay, now that we're done reviewing your medication, I would like to ask you some questions about your mood.
Mind if I join you? Figured I'd stop in to see how things are going.
Oh, honey, we were just getting started on some questions. If you have better things to do...
Nonsense. I'm happy to help.
If it's okay with you, Abby.
That's up to you, Mr. Mason. I'm going to ask you some questions about your mood and feelings over the past 2 weeks. I will also ask about some common problems that are known to go along with feeling down. Some of the questions might seem personal, but everyone is asked to answer them. This will help us provide you with better care.
Well, she's been by my side for 43 years now. She knows everything I've been through.
Then yes, it's fine with me.
Through thick and thin, right, hun?
Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by any of the following problems? Little interest or pleasure in doing things?
No, I think I've been...
Charlie, your appetite hasn't been the same. He used to have a voracious appetite. He'd eat everything on his plate and then ask for dessert. You have to admit you don't enjoy your food as much. I think you've lost some weight, too.
Mr. Mason, over the last 2 weeks, have you been bothered by having little interest or pleasure in doing things?
Martha's right. I don't have an appetite, and I used to love food. But since my surgery 3-4 days ago, I just haven't felt like eating.
Okay. I think I hear you saying that you used to have an appetite and really enjoyed eating, but now you don't enjoy eating as much as you used to.
Yeah, that's right.
How often have you been bothered by this?
I would say it's bothered me for the last 3 days. I was fine before my surgery. Now I just can't get my appetite back.
Well, we can talk more about that in a bit, and I think we can help you regain your appetite. Now I need to ask you if over the last 2 weeks you've been bothered by feeling down, depressed, or hopeless.
Not really.
Can you explain to me what you mean by not really? Can you be more specific?
Charlie, you have to be honest with her. Tell her what you told me.
I've always been a positive person, glass half full kind of guy. Active, upgoing, productive. Since my surgery, I haven't felt like myself. I had a lot more pain than I thought I would, and everything seems to have stopped working, if you know what I mean. And it's more than just that. I feel hopeless. I thought I'd be my old self, but I'm not bouncing back. I'm so much weaker, and I still need help. That's not like me. I'm not 90. I was playing basketball 2 weeks ago, and now look at me. I can barely make it down the hall. I'm just so frustrated.
Charlie, I know you're discouraged, but the hope is to get you feeling like your old self again. Isn't that right, Abby?
Exactly. That's why we need to ask some of these questions. Now, Mr. Mason, would you say these feelings have been happening only since the surgery 3 days ago, or did you have these feelings prior to the surgery as well?
Only since the surgery. You think things will ever get better, Martha?
It's like I told you before, Charlie. You're a fighter. You're not going to let this little setback get you down. Sounds like Abby has a few more questions for you. I have some barley vegetable soup to heat up. Seems like you could really use it.
Thanks, honey. You know what I need.
Now that you have watched the video, let's code the mood interview for Mr. Mason. How would you code symptom presence for D0150A1? Little interest or pleasure in doing things. 0, no. 1, yes. 9, no response. How would you code symptom frequency for D0150A2? 0, never or 1 day. 1, 2 to 6 days, several days. 2, 7 to 11 days, half or more of the days. 3, 12 to 14 days, nearly every day. How would you code symptom presence for D0150B1, feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150B2? The correct coding for D0150A1 would be 1, yes, as Mr. Mason explained that he no longer enjoys eating like he used to. The correct coding for symptom frequency for D0150A2 is 1, 2 to 6 days, as Mr. Mason identified that he has only been bothered by his symptoms since his surgery, which was 3 days ago. The correct coding for symptom presence for D0150B1 is 1, yes. Mr. Mason explained that he was bothered by feelings of hopelessness. The correct coding for Mr. Mason's symptom frequency for D0150B2 is 2 to 6 days. Mr. Mason identified that he has only been bothered by his symptoms since his surgery, which was 3 days ago. After the coding of D0150A and D0150B is completed, the clinician must determine if the interview should continue. In this coding scenario for both D0150A and D0150B, column 2, symptom frequency, was coded with a 1, so the interview would not continue, and this would conclude the interview. Let's view another patient-resident mood interview and code the responses. Based on the patient-resident's responses to the first 2 questions, we will determine if the interview should continue. We will take periodic breaks from the video to allow you to code items, reveal correct coding and rationale, and identify specific assessment techniques that the nurse used to elicit accurate coding. A nurse is admitting Ms. Swanson and is conducting a mood interview as a part of her admission assessment.
Ms. Swanson, I am going to ask you some questions about your mood and your feelings over the past 2 weeks. I will also ask you about some common problems known to go along with feeling down. Some of the questions might seem personal, but everyone is asked to answer them. This will help us provide you with better care.
Okay. I don't do very good on tests, you know. I get nervous.
This is not a test. I'm going to ask you about how often you've been bothered by a particular problem over the last 2 weeks. I'll give you the choices you see on this card. You see here, 0 means never or 1 day, 2 to 6 days is several days, 7 to 11 days is half or more of the days, or 12 to 14 days, nearly every day. You'll pick one of these responses to identify how many days you've been bothered by those feelings over the last 2 weeks.
Okay, so all I have to do is give you the number?
Yes, Ms. Swanson.
I can do that.
Great. Now, over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by any of the following problems? Little interest or pleasure in doing things?
Well, yes. Since my health has changed, I don't enjoy doing things the way I used to. It seems like I've lost my appetite, and I typically have a good one.
Okay. About how often have you been bothered by this?
It's been about every day. I just don't feel much like doing anything. And the troubling thing is, I'm not a lazy person, just not motivated.
I understand, Ms. Swanson. Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by feeling down, depressed, or hopeless?
Yes. I feel like I'll never be the same. Hopelessness. Yes, that's what I would call it.
About how often have you been bothered by this?
Oh, I don't know. Let me take a look at this card. I know it's not every day. 7 to 11 days.
Okay, let me take a minute to jot down some notes.
Let's take a break from the scene and look at coding this part of the mood interview for Ms. Swanson. How would you code symptom presence for D0150A1, little interest or pleasure in doing things? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150A2? How would you code symptom presence for D0150B1, feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150B2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's mood interview symptom presence for D0150A1 would be 1, yes. Ms. Swanson reported that she has been bothered by a recent loss in interest in doing things. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150A2 is 3, 12 to 14 days. Ms. Swanson identified that she had been bothered by her feelings of little interest or pleasure in doing things almost every day. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150B1 is 1, yes. She explained that she was bothered by feelings of hopelessness. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150B2 is 2, 7 to 11 days. Using a cue card, Ms. Swanson identified that she was bothered by feeling hopeless 7 to 11 days out of the last 2 weeks. Now that we have coded D0150A2 and D0150B2 symptom frequencies, we will determine if the interview should continue for Ms. Swanson. As noted, the symptom presence for the first 2 questions was not coded as 9, and D0150A2 and D0150B2 were not coded as 0 or 1. Therefore, the interviewer would continue the interview and ask the remaining 7 questions of the PHQ-2 to 9. Let's return to the practice coding scenario to see how Ms. Swanson responds to the remaining 7 questions.
Ms. Swanson, over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or sleeping too much?
No, I sleep just fine.
How about feeling tired or having little energy?
When you say having little energy, do you mean like not feeling like doing things? I feel like I don't have enough energy to walk down the hall to the bookshelf. I wish I could, but I don't feel up to it sometimes.
I think I hear you saying that you like to walk down the hall to the bookshelf, but you don't have the energy to do that. Is that right? Are you being bothered by feeling tired or having little energy to do that?
Yes, I wish I felt like doing things.
About how often have you been bothered by this?
About 7 to 11 days.
Now let's review the coding for this part of the interview. How would you code symptom presence for D0150C1, trouble falling or staying asleep or sleeping too much? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150C2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's mood interview symptom presence for D0150C1 would be 0, no. Ms. Swanson reported that she has not been bothered by trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or sleeping too much. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150C2 is 0, never or 1 day. Per the coding instructions, you would enter a 0 in column 2, symptom frequency, if column 1, symptom presence, is coded with a 0. How would you code symptom presence for D0150D1, feeling tired or having little energy? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150D2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150D1 is 1, yes. She explained that she was bothered by her feelings of not wanting to walk to the bookshelf. Note that Ms. Swanson responded to the nurse's question by asking what she meant. The nurse replied by echoing what Ms. Swanson said, and then clarified by repeating the question to determine symptom presence. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150D2 is 2, 7 to 11 days. Using a cue card, Ms. Swanson identified that she was bothered by feeling tired or having little energy about 7 to 11 days out of the last 2 weeks. Let's return to the practice coding scenario to see how Ms. Swanson responds to the next set of questions.
Ms. Swanson, over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by having a poor appetite or overeating?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned before, my appetite is not the same. You see these crackers here? I used to love having these as a snack. And I know I should eat. And it bothers me that I don't feel like eating much nowadays.
Over the past 2 weeks, about how often would you say you've been bothered by having a poor appetite?
Well, my daughter bought these crackers to the hospital because she knows I love them. And when they discharged me, I brought them with me, uneaten. And here they sit, still untouched.
Okay, I see this concerns you. Can you tell me how often over the past 2 weeks you've been bothered by having a poor appetite?
I guess it's been about every day.
Okay. Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by feeling bad about yourself, or that you're a failure, or that you've let yourself or your family down?
I don't know what you mean. I feel bad because I'm sick. Is that what you're talking about?
Let me try asking this in a different way. Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by feeling bad about yourself?
No.
How about feeling like you're a failure, or that you've let yourself or your family down?
Well, I don't feel like I've let myself down, but I feel real guilty because I've let my family down. See, my husband is debilitated, and now my daughter must help taking care of him. And she has a family of her own. And I'm really feeling like a burden on her, especially since I can't help with my husband.
Can you tell me about how often you would say you've been bothered by these feelings?
About this often.
Now, let's review what we have coded thus far. How would you code Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150E1, poor appetite or overeating? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150E2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150E1 would be 1 yes. Ms. Swanson explained how she was bothered by not wanting to eat. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150E2 would be 3. 12 to 14 days, nearly every day. Ms. Swanson describes in detail how she has left food uneaten and is bothered by her poor appetite. The nurse redirects Ms. Swanson by asking about symptom frequency again. How would you code Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150F1, feeling bad about yourself, or that you are a failure or have let yourself or your family down? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150F2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150F1 is 1 yes. Ms. Swanson explained that she was bothered by her feelings of letting her family down and being a burden. Note that Ms. Swanson indicated that she didn't understand the question. The nurse used the technique of disentangling by breaking the question up into segments. Once the nurse did that, Ms. Swanson was able to better understand the intent of the question and answer it accurately. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150F2 is 3. 12 to 14 days, nearly every day. Ms. Swanson, using a cue card, indicated that she has been feeling like this for the last 12 to 14 days. Let's return to the practice coding scenario to see how Ms. Swanson responds to the next set of questions.
Ms. Swanson, over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by having trouble concentrating on things such as reading the newspaper or watching television?
Well, like I said before, I don't enjoy doing things like these crossword puzzles here. Now I can't focus. I worry all the time. And it bothers me that I don't enjoy doing things like this anymore. They kept my mind sharp.
Over the past 2 weeks, about how often would you say you've been bothered by having trouble concentrating?
I don't know.
Would you like to take a look at the cue card to see if it can help you determine this?
Somewhere between 11 or 12 days. Most days I feel like this.
Okay, thank you. Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed, or the opposite? Being so fidgety or restless that you move around a lot more than usual?
No, I don't move very fast since I need to use this walker.
Let me restate the question. Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed, or the opposite?
Oh, you're asking if I'm bothered by moving or speaking so slowly that others would have noticed? No, I don't think so.
We are almost done, Miss Swanson. Over the past 2 weeks, have you been bothered by any thoughts that you would be better off dead or of hurting yourself in some way?
Yes, I hate to admit it, but as I said, at times I'm really feeling like a burden.
Can you identify how often you've been bothered by this?
It's hard to say.
Would you say that your thoughts of being better off dead have bothered you more than half the days in the past 2 weeks?
Oh no, not that often.
How about several days, like 2 to 6 days, or never or one day?
I would say this one, the 2 to 6, several days.
Thank you, Miss Swanson. We are all done with these questions now.
Okay, do you mind if I use the bathroom? I could use a stretch and a break.
Go ahead, take your time. I'll review your discharge paperwork from the hospital now.
Now that the scenario has concluded, let's take a look at Ms. Swanson's responses and finish coding this final part of the mood interview. How would you code Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150G1, trouble concentrating on things, such as reading the newspaper or watching television? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150G2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150G1 would be 1. Yes, Ms. Swanson described how she cannot focus on her crossword puzzles that she typically enjoys, and this bothers her. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150G2 would be 3. 12 to 14 days, nearly every day. Ms. Swanson stated that she had difficulty choosing between two frequencies and identified having this feeling around 11 to 12 days. This report straddles two code options. If a patient or resident has difficulty selecting between two frequency responses, code for the higher frequency. How would you code Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150H1, moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed, or the opposite, being so fidgety or restless that you have been moving around a lot more than usual? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150H2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150H1 is 0. No, Ms. Swanson responded that she has not been bothered by this symptom. Note that when answering this question, it was clear to the nurse that the patient resident didn't fully understand the question. Realizing this, the nurse restated the question, emphasizing part of the question to help clarify the intent. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150H2 is 0, never, or 1 day. For the coding instructions, enter a 0 in symptom frequency, column 2, if symptom presence, column 1, is coded with a 0. How would you code Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150I1? Thoughts that you would be better off dead, or of hurting yourself in some way? How would you code symptom frequency for D0150I2? The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom presence for D0150I1 would be 1. Yes, Ms. Swanson admitted that she was bothered by having these feelings. The correct coding for Ms. Swanson's symptom frequency for D0150I2 would be 1. 2 to 6 days, several days. Ms. Swanson reported having difficulty identifying how often she was feeling these symptoms. Understanding this, the nurse used an unfolding technique. By offering various frequency options, the nurse helped Ms. Swanson narrow down her response to more accurately reflect her symptom frequency. Once the mood interview is completed, the assessor would code D0160, Total Severity Score. This score is a summary of the frequency scores on the PHQ-2 to 9 that indicates the extent of potential depression symptoms. Let's take a look at how the nurse scored Ms. Swanson's PHQ-2 to 9 mood interview. To code the severity score for Ms. Swanson, add all the frequency response scores. The total severity score for Ms. Swanson would be 17. A guide to interpret the total severity score can be found in your current guidance manual, and the scores can be used to track changes in severity over time. Ms. Swanson's score indicates possible moderately severe depression. Further follow-up for her depression symptoms is warranted. In this training video, we demonstrated how to complete D0150, Patient Resident Mood Interview, PHQ-2 to 9, and D0160, Total Severity Score. As this is a standardized assessment, it is important that questions are asked exactly as written, and responses are based on the patient's or resident's interpretation. However, if a question is misunderstood, misinterpreted, or if the patient or resident is having trouble identifying a response, different strategies and techniques may be employed to elicit accurate responses and to assist with coding the assessment. In the vignettes provided, the nurse used various strategies to ensure accurate coding. The following strategies and techniques were demonstrated: redirection, clarification, use of symptom frequency response cue cards, echoing, disentangling, coding selection when responses straddle coding options, and unfolding. We hope you found this video helpful. For more information on coding D0150 Patient Resident Mood Interview PHQ-2 to 9 and D0160 Total Severity Score, refer to your settings-specific guidance manual, which can be found on the CMS website.